I want to welcome everybody that joined us today, and thank you for coming. Today we are lucky to have Congressman Bryan Steil with us to talk to us a little bit about the work he's been doing at the federal level on 988 and why mental health has become something that's important or a passion of his. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Congressman Steil.
Thanks, Nicole. Really appreciate you putting together today's event and everybody for being on. As a lot of you know, I've spent a lot of time on mental health. Maybe just give you a little bit of my journey as to why I think it's such an important topic and why I spent so much time on it. Really, if you go back when I first ran for office, obviously something you always think about, not something I dove into on a daily basis. And originally, it kind of started with me kind of digging in on veteran suicides. And when I started digging into the data and talking to people about it, I started to realize one of the most interesting statistics that I saw was that veteran was not highly correlated with whether or not an individual veteran saw combat abroad, which was kind of my natural instinct, thinking that a man or woman who was put in a really difficult position in Iraq or Afghanistan would likely have a more of a need for mental health treatment. And would show up in the data, and it didn't. And so I started digging in. It really made me a broader awareness of the mental health needs, not only in our veterans community, but across society. And really the importance of removing the stigma associated with mental health, so that people feel very comfortable going and getting help. That really was the driver of this, and thought, in my role in the House of Representatives, I have an ability to talk about topics and bring them to people's attention, and thought really spending a lot of time on mental health would be a really good thing, in the sense that we can help break down the stigma so that people go and get the treatment and care that they need. I think a lot, probably what I'll say is a quarter generation before me, if I can make micro generations up. But I think a lot about breast cancer or prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and really not that many years ago. You didn't openly talk about breast cancer or testicular cancer. We're much more comfortable with it, and more people are aware of the need to go and have that checked out, annually if you meet the demographic requirements. And so by breaking down that stigma, I think we've actually saved a lot of women's lives as it relates to breast cancer. We've also now, I think following that success, we followed up with prostate and testicular cancer for men in the need to prevent these diseases. I think one of the next things that I see in the data shows it is a real need to break down the stigma associated with getting the treatment that one needs for mental health. And if we take the success that we had as it relates to those two examples, breast cancer or testicular cancer or prostate cancer, and we lay that into what I think is the next frontier of mental health, I think we could actually have just a wonderful positive impact for our society. And what can we do to drive this forward? And so there's a handful of things, as you know, Nicole, that we've done over the past 2 years. So I held in-person forums on children's mental health. We did a forum in Racine Case High School, really highlighting what I think is a pretty world-class program with the Racine Unified School District of effectively embedding mental health services into our school district. And so I see Julie celebrating, but if you think about what this means, it allows a student who needs that care, maybe you pull them out of gym class, no insult to our gym teachers, but you pull them out of gym class rather than make them miss the whole morning. And so we saw parents that, say they had a 10 a.m. appointment, and mom or dad would say, I'm not even going to send you to school. I'm just going to keep you home, because there's no point in going all the way to school and pulling you out. And so then the 10 a.m. appointment, of course, finished, say 11. Well, I'll just bring you back after lunch. Well, let's just miss the whole day. And so you have a child that needed, 30 to 45 minute meeting. They missed a day of school. You embed it into the school. That same child can maybe get pulled out of gym class. But other than that, from the rest of the student's perspective, it's pretty seamless. They don't notice that a kid was out of gym class maybe, but it doesn't slow down their whole day. If we intervene early, we can have a really positive effect. Then we did a virtual town hall with COVID being the driver of that this summer again on children's mental health, bringing in additional experts. We have the bill that passed the House, which I'm excited about, 988, similar to 911, where you can call I'll oversimplify a little bit, but it's the one-stop shop when you need help and you don't know who to call. Not Ghostbusters, but 988. That passed the House, passed the Senate, and I'm confident that that's going to be signed into law here in the very near future. All indications are that President Trump will sign that, and we'll have a law that'll go into effect. I think that's a big win for mental health. As it relates specifically to COVID, if we just think about the last 6 months, we've seen a huge uptick in the need for mental health care services. And so one of the bills that I introduced was creating a grant program of $1 billion that would bring millions of dollars into Southeast Wisconsin to be able to provide care to mental health services from our providers, which are in big demand. I'd love to see that pass. It's something we're working on. That's not across the line yet. But I think there's some real opportunities there. And then the final piece that I've been spending also a lot of time on in this world of COVID, there's certain things that I think we've all observed that what I try to always view is what's the silver lining? What's the silver lining? And if there is one in COVID as it relates to mental health amongst all the challenges it's really brought an awareness of the success that we can have with telemedicine. We're all on a Zoom call today, talking to each other, interacting. It's not as nice as being in person. I'd rather be there with everybody, but it's also pretty handy. Nobody had a commute. Everybody's able to do it from the comfort of their own home. I see people, it looks like somebody might be in a kitchen or at least some workspaces around. And so it's a really easy way to do this. And we've seen success going back to the beginning in the veterans community. We had a lot of veterans that didn't want to go and get treatment at the VA. And what they were saying to us was, hey, Bryan, I go to the VA and I see one of my fellow veterans and he or she has lost a limb or, some horrific injury in service to our country. And they would say, Bryan, only have X. And you're saying, no, we want you to get the services. But what we discovered is by allowing them to utilize telemedicine, many of them felt far more comfortable because they weren't up in front of their colleagues or their fellow veterans. And maybe some sort of a shame or an embarrassment. Again, we work on the stigma, but in the short term, while that stigma still exists, allows that veteran just to grab their iPhone, maybe talk to a expert, and we can triage that from a volume standpoint. So if the Milwaukee VA, say it's really busy, maybe we can shift that person over to the Madison VA or to the Rockford VA or to Chicago. Let's get help where it's needed, especially in situations where someone's having an emergency, where the timeliness of that care is essential. And so to me, it's a bit of an all of the above approach. Let's break down the stigma. Let's talk about this topic. It's important. We can have a big impact just by chatting about it, just by putting it at the forefront. We can also have a policy impact by making it easier for people to get care. 988, telemedicine improvements. And then ultimately, stuff costs money, and we got to make sure we prioritize our priorities, if you will. And to me, that's making sure that we have the funding for mental health care, in particular, in our schools, our veterans community, and across the board during a period of time like this pandemic, where we see the need increase dramatically. And so I appreciate all you guys being on. I know this is a passionate topic for many of you, and you've been great to partner with as we navigate through this. And so, Nicole, I'll pause there. Love to open it up for questions, have a dialogue, and hear what's on your guys' mind also. Really appreciate everybody being on. I'll pass it back to you, Nicole.
Thank you. So I want to open it up for questions from our viewers. If you guys can utilize the chat feature under there or use the raise your hand feature if you have a question and unmute yourself. I'll start. I had a question emailed to me this afternoon, and I will go ahead and run that by you. So the question is, has the state looked into our local crisis centers being able to handle the capacity of calls that could potentially come in when someone dials 988? I think it will be difficult for some agencies to handle, especially without an increase in funding, training, and technology.
It's a great question by the man or woman who wrote that in today. This is going to be, we're going to be learning this together. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat this. When a new program like this rolls out, I'm not going to offer to you that it's going to be seamless on day one. I'm just going to offer to you it's going to be better on day one than it was before we had it. And then it's one of those things that I view as one of my roles in Congress is to bird dog this stuff. That's a bit of a hunting term maybe, but to stay on it and to make sure that it's working and we're getting results. And so I agree, it's not going to be probably seamless day one. There's going to be hiccups. But the key here is we're making improvements. So we might not have perfection on day one, but I do feel confident that the enthusiasm and the energy we got to pass this bill is a really positive sign that more of my colleagues are paying attention to this topic, that we can then drive the funding in. We can get partnerships from other entities as well, right? State partnerships, local partnerships, and that ultimately we can view this and look back at this as a really successful program, like probably many of us do on 911, right? It was when I was a little kid, right? On the back of everybody's phone was a sticker, right? It was poison control, this number, police, this number. Look, as I look at the Zoom here, it looks like people are my age or older, so everybody remembers this. You had to explain to your babysitter how to make these phone calls. 911 saved us a ton of that. And I think that this is one of those opportunities where, if done right, we'll look back a period of time and say, remember when you had to look up how to get mental health treatment? And people say now that it's a very straightforward process. And hopefully we're saving lives and getting people back on track and able to live productive lives and be great members of society.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else have a question they wanted to share with us? All right, Leah, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am a K-2 counselor in the Racine Unified School District, and I sing the praises of the mental health program that we have. However, we don't have it in all the schools yet. We're working towards that, obviously. I'm wondering if there's anything in particular in your bill that you're supporting that would directly address early intervention and really early childhood learning. Typically, we tend to give more resources as the kids get older rather than take a more proactive approach with younger kids working with their families as well. Is there anything in the bill that directly addresses that?
So in the funding bill that I have, where it would add $1 billion for mental health care grants, it would be up to the grant writer as to how they would do that. So say hypothetically, if we get the bill passed, Racine Unified School District could write a grant and say, we'd like additional funding and we're going to use it for early intervention. And a lot of that is going to be what's driven on the ground as to what the healthcare experts are suggesting, what is the best way to spend these funds. I won't opine that I am that local expert as to how inside Racine Unified School District, just as one example, if they got an extra $1 million, again, just making up a number, how best they would use that, but it'd be asking you guys, the experts on the ground, saying, there's limited resources, but if we can get that additional funding up, where should we triage it? It looks like you have some background, Leah, kind of early childhood intervention. I'm completely supportive of it, but I personally would be looking to the experts to decide what is the best use of these funds. The bill that I have does not dictate how it's used. It's realizing that there's a massive uptick in need during this pandemic as people are at home. You've probably seen some of the horrific stats as it relates to child abuse, which just makes you really appreciate what our teachers are doing every day. Not only are they teaching you reading, writing, and arithmetic, but sometimes they're that early intervention, especially maybe going back to some of these young children that you're thinking about, where the stats have shown that the rates of child abuse that are reported have plummeted. Well, it's not that it's not occurring, it's that it's not being observed, right? I mean, and then the rates of what we'll all say are horrific incidents where a child would make it all the way to the hospital, which means that it's been unreported, and then made it to a level that is really, it's hard to wrap your head around somebody who's going to injure a child like this. But those numbers have spiked. And so to me, that's a sign that these younger children and getting that early intervention could play a role in playing some of these things out. But my bill would be the funding, and then allow these local decision makers to apply grants to determine in their specific jurisdiction, location, what's the best use for these funds. But I appreciate you bringing up the early childhood part, Leah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Leah. I have one submitted through the chat. The question is, how do we provide law enforcement with the necessary tools to handle mental health crisis, knowing that many will call 911 for assistance? Should the police be the first to respond to these calls?
That is a spectacular question on a lot of our minds. So I think we can break it down maybe in a couple different ways. So one, hopefully if we get 988 implemented, a situation that doesn't, what I'll say, doesn't, that might be a great first avenue for people to call if your situation would allow it, right? So maybe sub emergency, but above, no intervention, right? So 911 hopefully will be an avenue where people could begin the process. Two is I support additional funding for our police in de-escalation. And inside de-escalation, there's aspects of that that's mental health treatment, right? So how do you de-escalate somebody who's having maybe a mental health breakdown, kind of oversimplified, right? But that's often where these police officers are being called into situations where it's that individual's probably their worst day or one of their worst days. And so if we can drive forward training for our police departments into de-escalation, I think that we would all benefit. There's broad support for that. Partisan politics has gotten in the way of Congress's ability to deliver that funding, but there's broad support. I work on a bipartisan coalition where if we get the opportunity to bring this to the floor, we will. I'm actually highly confident it'll happen after the election for all the wrong partisan reasons, but I feel confident that this is going to go through. And so I think that funding into the training side for law enforcement would be really productive. And I've spoken to the law enforcement leaders, African-American community leaders, educational leaders, mental health folks about the benefits that would be. And it's one of the challenges that we see, right? Our police are asked to do a lot with limited budgets and funding. I think 988 will be a positive step in the right direction, giving people another avenue to call and reach out and seek help, guidance and counseling. And then also driving forward additional training to our police departments, in particular as it relates to de-escalation, would be quite positive. You might be on mute, Nicole.
Thank you. I was. Thank you for your response, and thank you for the question, Sydney. We have another question from Julie. What work has been done to bring mental health curriculum into our schools in order to reduce stigma and increase awareness?
That's a question where maybe we can open it up for other people on this call who have more experience, particularly as it relates to the school. I will admit that's not my personal area of expertise as to how the schools. I did the childhood mental health forum at Racine Case High School, just because Racine Unified School District does such a good job. I don't know if Julie or anybody else on this call wants to take a shot at providing.
So I'm actually going to jump in on this one too, because that is
Please,
something that
I'll pass to you, Nicole.
NAMI Racine County has a wonderful program called Ending the Silence. Ending the Silence is a program that's specifically geared towards middle school and high school kids and their health classes. And we talk about what the signs and symptoms of mental illness are, what it's like to feel those things and experience those things from a firsthand perspective. So we're a very peer modeled organization. So we like to use people who have lived experience to share their experiences with people who might be struggling. Nobody can connect with you better than somebody who's been in your shoes. So we offer that to the high schools and the middle schools to teach them about the signs and symptoms, what to do if they're feeling those things, where to reach out, who they can talk to, and to let them know that they're not alone. I think that's one of the biggest things as somebody who lives with a mental illness themselves. Had I had that growing up and somebody coming into my classroom and telling me, hey, I get it, I've been there too, that could have made a huge difference for me growing up. So I love that NAMI has this service that we're able to provide these students and get into the classrooms and talk to them. And I hope to continue our partnership with RUSD doing that. Sorry, that's it.
I think I just want to jump in. Yeah, I want to jump in too, because what I'm talking about in the way of mental health curriculum is really kind of that missing piece right now from my lens working within the school district and looking at multi-tiered levels of support for our kids and what do they really need and how do you start to build those systems that really help support the whole child and their family. So as Nicole talked about, NAMI has been an awesome partner for us to really start to look at how do we support our kids in the middle and high school, but it also comes underneath some policy change around what are those pieces that really need to be in curriculum and really starting to talk about mental health all the time with our kids, not just in ninth grade health class. And that's kind of what we have today. And so what I'm proposing is, how do we start to really look at evidence-based curriculum that works, that addresses our kids' needs all the way through early childhood, all the way through high school, and then start to build programs like Nicole talked about. How do we support our students in having those conversations? I think all starts that stigma conversation, and how do we start to build in, and I think to our point of how do you end up having leveraging the right amount of mental health supports our kids need, because each building, each school is different, and I'll say each school district is different. And we've learned that across the state. But I think your support and just starting to have this conversation about funding things in the most appropriate way, I'm really excited to see how that could come out for the state of Wisconsin. So thanks for doing that.
All right, did anyone else have anything they wanted to share while we're on the topic of programs in schools and building the curriculum?
I can say, even though Julie already knows this because we work together, but we are, along with, tagging off of what you were talking about with increased rates of child abuse during this pandemic, we're also seeing increased suicide rates across many different age groups that we're not normally used to seeing such spikes in. Prior to the pandemic, just by a few months, in my career, I saw the earliest suicide I've ever experienced, which was an elementary school child. And so we don't have any, like Julie was saying, we have mandated suicide prevention programs that are beginning to be taught in middle school and high school, but we've had to kind of, find things that worked for us at the elementary level that aren't necessarily part of the curriculum that's mandated. So it would be great to find things that were age appropriate, funded through, maybe the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, that kind of stuff that we could use at the younger level to increase that suicide prevention.
It's a great thought.
Thank you, Leah. And yes, that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. I know NAMI Wisconsin has a mental health chat program that's designed for elementary age students, and it's talking about working through feelings and being able to identify those and share those with adults, which at many times at a young age we don't really understand. Another piece of that, I think, is getting in front of the parents and having classes or programs or educational courses for them, teaching them about what mental illness is, what the signs and symptoms are, what to look for in their children, and where they can go once they have identified those things.
We could go down a whole rabbit hole, but I also think, and you guys are probably experts on some of this, right? It's the role social media is playing in some of our younger children. I'm in the midst of a big campaign. You don't want to read my social media comments, but one thing for me, fine, right? I mean, people say all sorts of stuff. That's, I guess, part of the job, as crazy as it is. But I have 10 nieces and nephews who span the age range of high school all the way down to pre-kindergarten. And as you watch that brain development, the confusion of what's real and what's not, what does a comment mean, is incredibly confusing. Just because they'll ask me about comments that they've seen on my posts, and you go, oh yeah, but that's not real. It's got to be having a major factor. I don't want to take us all the way down in the rabbit hole because we're not going to solve it today in the final 8 minutes. But it's something that we're going to have to, as a broadly as a society, wrap our heads around how we want to allow this to be part of our lives, and how we can put precaution or safety mechanisms in place to avoid some of the real challenging aspects of Facebook or Twitter, et cetera.
Right. No, it's definitely a piece of that. Yeah. And you're totally right. We can go on and on and on and on this subject. But yeah, these are things that we need to start paying attention to. And I'm super glad that we have representation like you, Congressman Steil, out there that is bringing light to these situations and these problems that need to be addressed. We've got a couple more minutes. Did anyone else have a question they'd like to get out there?
Can I state the question here or through chat?
You can go ahead and say it, Pat.
It's on the correct format. Congressman Steil, thank you for joining us today. I'm Pat Bowen, President of Racine County. Greatly appreciate your work and advocacy. An area that's been very near and dear to the NAMI movement over the last 40 years is funding of basic research through the NIH and NIMH. What is your view of the future roles of those entities as we continue to try to understand brain function, mental illness, more effective treatments? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, Patrick, great question. As some of you may know, I used to serve on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents before I ran for office, which is, I call it like the school board for our state colleges. And in that, I spent a lot of time on the research that they're doing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, also some of the other campuses as well. And one of the best investments we can make at the federal level is through the Pandemic Center for Disease Control, but also National Institute of Health. And I've had an opportunity to go out and meet with some of these researchers out at the NIH in DC and speak with them, and some of the funding that gets spread across to some of our best researchers around the United States. I'm kind of a finance geek. And so in my business background, I always look at this as like, what's your return on your investment? And the return on your investment on this, like, I'm going to geek out, but like it's like a capital improvement, right? If you invest this and if you crack the nut and somebody solves it, your return is for forever, right? So if you think whoever invested the money oversimplified to like find a cure for polio, I mean, we're all beneficiaries of that today, right? We don't have effectively nobody that's impacted by polio or more or less measles, other than the issues with getting vaccines out. But the investment on that front, Patrick, I think is spot on. I've been a big supporter of increasing the budgets and the investment side of the National Institute of Health. It's only been, I think members are now more aware of that, broadly speaking, in the pandemic context that we're in, but not lost on all these other types of things that they can navigate. I mean, some of the cancer research that's being done nationally, some of it, Carbone Cancer Center in Madison, and the same is very true on the mental health side, where the more we gain an understanding of how we can attack this from a medical standpoint, the better off we all are, right? And I think it's actually one of those areas where we can have a really thoughtful, productive investment and get a really good return. It probably sounds more like I'm an accountant than anything else, but that's sometimes how my brain thinks. I think you're bringing that up is spot on and a big support of it. That's something I'm going to go back. You gave me a homework assignment to read into what that funding structure looks like and where we're at on some of the research on the mental health side. I spent a lot of time on cancer and Alzheimer's, but I go home and have a research for you, Patrick. So appreciate it.
Thank you. I've never given a homework assignment to a congressman before, so it's a new experience. Our treasurer, Julie. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I say our treasurer, Julie Filer, I think she greatly appreciated your return on investment comments, so I can see her shaking her head vigorously. So sorry to interrupt. I apologize.
No, I love it. No, I'm a geek. I'm going to go home and read more. So I'm going to go pull some documents and see where we're at on that. And I'll have a better, more nuanced answer for you with more numbers next time, Patrick. But great question.
Thank you.
All right. It looks like we're coming to our time. Congressman Steil, if you'd like to say some closing words for our group.
Yeah, well, more than anything, really appreciate you guys having me on. I mean, I think the more that we talk about this, the more we continue to break down the stigma. We're going to be doing more in the months and years ahead. And so working together, I think we have a great opportunity to kind of raise awareness together and have a real substantive impact in our community. And so I know a lot of you guys, this is a passion for you. You guys put in a ton of time and effort, NAMI and Racine Unified School District and others that are doing day in and day out. So I appreciate the work that you guys do and really appreciate you having me on for the conversation. Look forward to doing this again with everybody. Knock on wood that we're on the other side of the pandemic and we can be in person. But for the time being, I'll take Zoom. Really appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you've got a lot going on too. Again, this was Congressman Steil. He's our representative of the 1st District. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.